I'm Daniel Meyer, music director of the Erie Philharmonic, and I am pleased to be with you on this, the second of our coffee chats with musicians from the Erie Philharmonic. And I'm really excited today to be talking to Whitney Clair, second trombone, and Ken Heinlein, principal tuba. So we've got the brass section represented here today in our coffee chat. How are you guys doing? I know it's been a while since we've shared the stage together, and we're a little far flung at this point. This happens when you work with an orchestra, even one like the Erie Philharmonic, because our musicians come from all over the world, number one, and then, of course, we all have commitments and family members spread far and wide. So let's just tell the audience where we're coming from. We're, of course, on a Zoom call. And Whitney, why don't we start with you? Can you tell us where you are and how long you've been there?
Yeah, sure. I'm currently in Jacksonville, Florida, which explains why I'm in tank top and you guys look nice and cozy in long sleeves. It is very warm here. I moved from Cleveland, Ohio in August down to Jacksonville, Florida. So I have not been here a full year yet, and I'm approaching my first full Florida summer. And it is getting humid and warm. But I always love coming up to Erie to play, and I'm down in Jacksonville because my husband has a job down here. So I moved down in August and making this home base for now.
Yeah, I think it may be fair to say that you have the furthest commute, unless, Ken, can you think of anybody else who has I mean, you have a pretty sizable commute yourself, but not quite as far as Jackson.
Yeah, I drive mine, but Whitney flies in, so she wins.
I drive sometimes.
Ooh.
Yeah.
How long is that drive from Jacksonville to Erie, Pennsylvania?
Jacksonville to Erie, I think would be maybe 15 or 16 hours.
Wow.
Maybe it's 15. I head into Cleveland usually to stay with a friend who's also in the orchestra, and that's about 13. So I can do that in one day if I am committed.
That is a commitment. How about you, Ken?
Well, I'm actually calling in from Ann Arbor, Michigan. I was based in Cleveland for over a decade and decided I actually wanted to go back to school and do my doctorate. So I came back up here, I moved here, and I'm just finishing up now, but for Erie Philharmonic rehearsals for the last several years, I've always had class that goes until 2:30, and I would have the car basically running out in the parking lot, run out from class, jump in the car, and I could make it by 7:15 if I didn't stop. Made it all the way to rehearsal, and quick try to get my brain straight. Apologize to Whitney, my fearless leader, that I couldn't figure out how to count rest for the first 10 minutes while I got my eyes facing a piece of music, and then off we went.
That's the kind of insane thing that we do. I mean, that's our lives. A lot of us are commuting from it could be as many as 2, 3, 4, and in some cases, like in Whitney's cases, 15 hours away. So that's I think that's one thing that people don't realize is that most of our rehearsals happen in the evenings. So in Erie, we have a somewhat unusual rehearsal sequence for our classical concerts where we rehearse on Monday nights, Wednesday nights, Friday nights, all at 7:30, and we start at 7:30, we go all the way until 10 p.m., and we take a 15-minute break somewhere in the middle there. And then we have a dress rehearsal, which happens on the stage of the Warner Theater on the Saturday afternoon, and that starts at 2:30 and generally wraps up around 5 or 2 to 4. And I think people don't realize that requires a full day of work and travel and then being at your best on the stage at rehearsals. I mean, you talked a little bit about that, Ken. Can you elaborate a little bit more as to what sort of things do you need to be ready for at 7:30? I mean, do you have to physically warm up your lips before you get on stage, or are you buzzing into your mouthpiece as you're driving down the freeway? I mean, how do you get yourself prepared for a 2.5 hour rehearsal?
If any of the kind officers in Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania are listening, I don't buzz my lips while I'm driving down the road. I do, but legally I don't. No, it's a little crazy because many people have gone through music programs in their schools and whatnot, and they think of rehearsals as being a certain thing, something that happens daily and happens over the course of weeks or months. Of course, that's just not practical for a regional semi-professional orchestra. We have to get together the week of and get things together. So the preparation for a concert starts a long way in advance, at least several weeks of listening to the piece, practicing the piece, playing along with recordings. Oftentimes, Whitney and I will have some conversations about a piece or something that we want to do inside the section. Since Whitney has been acting as principal for more than a year, we kind of form the outside ends of the low brass section and can kind of start to craft interpretation ideas. So we're working on all that before we show up to the first rehearsal. The day of course, there's all the warm-up and such. Because of my commute, I end up having to warm up in the morning and do any practice that I need to do. And then the drive operates as some kind of break. I'll get on stage and make sure I remember how to play the tuba quick before I start. And then we're off to the races. And in rehearsal, of course, you have to be very present of mind, which is sometimes difficult after a day of class and then some commute. And if you can't fix something right away in the moment, which, Maestro, you always push us to be able to fix things and get things right how we want them to. And there's not a ton of grace just because it's the first rehearsal. You have a vision for how you want the piece to go, and it's our responsibility to execute that. And then marking anything in the music that we need. And because of our staggered day rehearsal schedule, then to take Tuesday and try to change your mind and change some of your ideas that you may have brought in about the piece. And all of that practice and forming ideas and forming an interpretation, it's not that it's a waste, it's that it gives you something to start from. And then it changes as you see what your principal wants and what principal trumpet wants. And maybe double basses are doing something different here than I was planning on doing, but I have to match with that section. And so then you go and you kind of rebuild your interpretation. You come in Wednesday and you compare. And between your ideas, Maestro, and everyone else in the orchestra, and then you see how close you got it. And this evolution of a piece as you're influenced by everyone around you, and as you in turn influence all those other people, ends up taking a lot of practice time as the week goes on. And so rehearsals in an orchestra like this are almost unbelievably intense.
Oh yeah. And we throw in an extra level of difficulty because the first two rehearsals are in a space different from the hall in which we actually will perform the music. And that's always mind-blowing to me. As long as I've worked with this orchestra and as much as I have accustomed myself to that reality, it still is virtually impossible to overcome how different an acoustical space can affect the way that you play, the way that you react, the tempos that you take. We have this wonderful space at Edinburgh University. It's a nice reverberant space. It's a pretty compact space. And then when we hit the Warner Theater, it's this big, wide open former movie house with a very shallow stage from front to back, but very wide from left to right. And these are all issues then that we have to contend with kind of at the last minute. And one thing I noticed too is that we'll spend most of the first two rehearsals working on the purely symphonic pieces. So the symphony or the tone poem or whatever the big work is that features the Philharmonic at Edinburgh. So we get used to a certain set of expectations and timing and acoustic and phrasing. And then on Friday is generally the first day that we meet the guest soloist. So whether it's a pianist, a guitarist, or a violinist, or what have you, they take up a big portion of that Friday rehearsal. And of course, there's an advantage there because you do get a chance to understand the acoustic and how it's working. And then, whoa, we have to perform this huge symphony on practically a dress rehearsal and maybe a little bit of the second half of the Friday night rehearsal. So it's kind of mind-blowing. But Whitney, I wanted to ask you a little bit about that as well, because, you know, the brass instruments, of course, like the double basses, respond slightly slower in and of themselves just because they're such large instruments. But then they're so far away from the front of the stage. How do you guys accommodate or even come to grips with how that even functions? Do you really feel like you have to play way ahead of the beat?
Yes. Oh, yeah. And it's funny to compare Edinburgh to the Warner too, because our distance from you, our distance from the audience, is very different between those two spaces. So in Edinburgh, we're at the very back of the stage, and that's more of a square stage. So we're further from you. And then in the Warner, since it gets shallow and wide, we get a little bit closer to the front of the stage, but maybe a little bit off to the side. And we're on a riser too sometimes. Edinburgh is sometimes more difficult, I think. I don't know what you think, Ken, but it's more difficult to make sure we're not late. And I'm sure you recall many times when our first entrances in Edinburgh are coming late just because of that distance. It just speaks after. So we spend those first couple rehearsals in Edinburgh trying to make sure we're playing with everyone else in front of us. And then we get to the Warner and actually gets a little bit easier, I think. So maybe that's a good step for us to take towards the performance, that throughout the week, that our job gets a little bit easier there. But yeah, it's an adjustment, and a lot of times there won't be low brass on a concerto. So sometimes our first rehearsal in the Warner is the day of. But I think we're pretty versatile, and we're ready to jump in and make the changes we need to make. So sometimes that just takes a little bit of time to figure out in each new piece.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit, Whitney, and Ken, about the dynamics between just that low brass group? I mean, you talked a little bit about how you guys would talk. You actually talk sometimes before the rehearsal even happens. But once you're in the rehearsal, I mean, it really feels like a world that then needs to enter another world, right? I mean, you guys have to be unanimous in the way that you approach your playing, so that ultimately it becomes a family that locks into the rest of the group. Yeah.
Like Ken was saying, sometimes we do some discussion beforehand, but when we're each listening to the piece and learning it, we might be listening to different recordings with different interpretations than you have. So sometimes we can get to that first rehearsal and it's like, oh, I was going to do it this way and you're going to do it that way. Okay, let's discuss. So we do a lot of verbal discussion in the back of the hall, and we also, listening is so important. So we'll just be playing. I'll hear Ken hold a note a little bit longer, play something a little bit shorter, and just lean down the line and be like, how do we want to do this? And we'll just figure it out. We'll consult principal trumpet, whoever else needs to get involved, and come to a consensus. So there's a lot of that, and a lot of it can just be solved by just listening and liking what someone else is doing and making that change immediately. But there's a lot of discussion too, and making sure we're all on the same page.
Yeah, we lean down the line, as it's called. So I'll lean forward, Whitney will lean forward, and we'll talk to each other, and then the section gets to hear it. When you look from outside, what's not immediately apparent is this very pure hierarchy that exists in an orchestra. Whitney is a principal player, I'm a principal player, and the two middle trombones in the section are section players. And so we always invite them to give input and talk about their musical ideas, but at the end of the day, part of Whitney and I's job is to kind of set what we're going to do for the section. And with trombone being a higher position than tuba, in the moment, it's my job to mimic what Whitney is doing. She's my boss. And so, with not always being able to rely on our ears, especially in Edinburgh, one of the interesting things is that I usually have to turn in just such a way that I can both see you, Maestro, and also see Whitney over here, because seeing how she kind of places a note is where I need to begin the note, not necessarily where I hear it. It's total trust in your principal. And then if we didn't align on something, or even if we did align and it wasn't necessarily what I thought that we should do, sometimes I'll lean down and, hey, Whitney, maybe we could do this, and ultimately it comes to her call. But there's always a respect and a camaraderie in Erie that is unlike anywhere I've ever played. Sometimes, if we have a break for some measures, I'll put my tuba down and actually move around the section so I can kind of be next to Whitney and talk over a couple things. And then I'm next to principal trumpet as well, and we can figure some things out. But there is a fair amount of communication happening at all times, and we're not talking about baseball. We can talk about that at break. It's always shop talk, and getting the best possible product we can.
Yeah, I've heard some pretty legendary stories of conductors that will completely flip out when they see the brass section talking, because they think that they're rabble-rousing, or they're talking about baseball or something not related to the music making. And I'm always excited when I see you guys talk to each other, because I know it's towards the common good. I mean, everybody's kind of in it to make each other sound as good as possible. And I as the conductor, I can cover a lot, but I can't cover nearly every detail that's related to playing in every single section over the course of 3 rehearsals plus a dress rehearsal. So I'm actually thrilled when sections kind of take it upon themselves to agree to find a way to reach a commonality between their voices. And I think it's pretty exciting. And one thing that I respect of you both in your playing and the way that you handle your jobs with the Philharmonic. Whitney, tell me a little bit about some of the other playing that you do. Are you playing in some other ensembles? Are you teaching right now? What is your life like in the trombone or the low brass world?
Yeah, well, it's gone through a little bit of a change since I moved to Florida. So before I moved, I was doing a lot of teaching. I taught for the Cleveland Institute of Music prep department. I had a private studio of my own. I did a little bit of teaching at Baldwin Wallace, just as an adjunct faculty member. And then I do a lot of playing with the ensembles in the area. So I played with City Music Cleveland, and I subbed in Akron, a little bit in Canton, and there are a lot of regional orchestras in that area. Since I've moved, I've done some playing with the Jacksonville Symphony here, and I'm a member of the Coastal Symphony of Georgia in Brunswick, Georgia, which is just an hour and a half north of here. So kind of figuring out where the playing is around here too. I haven't resumed teaching yet. It's harder to find where those channels are, I find, down here than in Cleveland, and in that whole area, Cleveland, Erie, Pittsburgh, there's so much music, so much to do. So I'm still staying busy, and that's why I love coming back to Erie to play, and I come back to Cleveland to play a little bit too. But yeah, lots of different groups to play with.
Ken, what is it like on your end? I know that you're pursuing a doctorate in music, so I imagine that saps up a huge amount of time. Do you have time to play in other ensembles, or to teach, or to dabble in that world?
My wife would say that I don't have time, but it's an act of will at a certain point. When I decided to come back up here and start my doctorate, I was already playing in Erie, and I decided that I wanted to do the doctorate but not give up my life in the greater Northeast Ohio and Erie area. So I actually kept all of my work in Cleveland that I had when I came up here. So of course there's some obligations as a student here at Michigan, which have been extraordinary. The University of Michigan is an incredible place to be in school. But I kept playing both with Erie and then with the Akron Symphony. And then I teach in Kent at Kent State University, and then in Berea, Ohio at Baldwin Wallace University. So I've kept doing all of those things and just commuting back and forth, but I'll be moving back to Northeast Ohio in the next 10 days.
Oh, wow.
That'll make my life significantly easier. But
so how far along are you? Have you passed all your comprehensive exams?
I have.
Congratulations.
So I had 1 degree recital left to go, and COVID shut everything down.
So can that recital be done virtually, or are you going to have to make your way back to Ann Arbor at some point and give the recital?
I'm going to end up staying enrolled for an extra semester. Okay. The School of Music's been very accommodating to me. And so, yeah, I'll be coming up. I'll still be doing a little bit of teaching. I've actually been teaching musicology, which is music history, while I've been at Michigan. So I'll keep doing that in the fall and give my recital during that time, and I'll hopefully graduate in December 2020.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, congratulations on that. That's a huge accomplishment, and particularly when you're straddling all those worlds and doing all that traveling in between and continuing your professional engagements and relationships. I think that's wonderful. Well, why don't we switch gears a little bit and just talk about things that you've been up to during this quarantine. Of course, it's been miserable not to play in our ensembles, and we miss playing a lot, but some people have picked up new hobbies, new sports, cooking new recipes. What sorts of things are you into, Whitney? Have you discovered a new recipe or a new passion that you didn't know you had?
Yeah, I mean, lots of new recipes have been tried in this household. My hobby is eating them, and my husband's hobby is making them. So he is the chef in our family, and so he has gone all out because he has had no work also since March, and he's now off through the summer. So I plan to eat well, but I think his most daring new recipe, he made donuts from
Wow.
scratch, and they were delicious. Yes, yeah, and so lots of things like that, lots of desserts and new things, lots of breads too, which is delicious, my favorite. So that's mostly been my new hobby. But besides that, we have a border collie with lots of energy, and she needs lots of love and attention, and has loved us being home all the time.
Oh, I can
So
imagine.
we're going on walks with her and finding new parks and places to go for walks around here. So that's been most of our extra time that we have now.
How about you, Ken?
Well, first of all, I've got to say I'm a little jealous of Whitney. I'm a Her husband Chris is a fabulous cook, and I've been a fan of his for over a decade. And I miss our nights we get together and cook and eat. And man, I've been trying my best, but I'm no Chris Graham. Um, no, when everything switched with the COVID crisis, of course, all teaching went online,
Mhm.
and the lift of you know creating a class and teaching a class, and then them basically giving you a week and saying, like, now I need you to recreate the class and move it onto an online platform, was huge. And so all of March and April and the beginning of May was pretty much wall-to-wall work. My wife and I kind of tore apart our apartment out here because her teaching went online and my teaching went online. So we took apart the living room and put out a long table and built a teaching area, virtual teaching studio. So that brought us up to a couple weeks ago. I've been waiting for the board to come, but it kind of hasn't yet. Um, Practicing has been pretty exciting. I just have a small apartment here in Ann Arbor, so tuba practice is not on the menu. Um, and so 2 weeks ago it was snowing, that didn't work. Last week it was 95, that didn't
Wow.
work. But I found a loading dock um, here on campus that has a little roof on it. And so in the morning and late at night, I go over and hide on the loading dock and get some practice done. And honestly, the nicest thing for me has just been not driving. Um, it's been a lot of commuting the last few years, and so switching from audiobooks to actually reading a book has been really nice. And to just have some food at home rather than trying to grab everything behind the wheel has been really nice. And I don't think I've been as productive as I could be, but I've been trying to revalue myself in terms of not only valuing my productivity, but just like being a human a little bit has been nice,
Yeah, reading a book. What is that?
right?
What a novel concept.
I shouldn't be talking to you, Maestro. You've got a young family, but yeah,
No,
Hey,
I
Ken.
completely appreciate what you're saying because it's, when we are in the rhythm of the year, whether it's the academic year or the academic year married to the professional year, it's pretty much everything happens in the same 7 or 8 months. And, just the time to unplug or even just think about what you've just done is almost non-existent. And I agree with you. Sometimes driving is my only time of solace where I really just can put the phone to the side and maybe put on a good recording or nothing at all, or listen to podcasts and just catch up on the world. Yeah.
it's honestly been nice though. A new tradition in our house is game nights. Um, it's uh, well, Whitney and I actually used to do this in person. I've known Whitney for a very long time, and um, before her husband and her were married, and before I'd even met my wife, we'd all get together and we would have dinner and we'd play games, and then met my wife and we'd get together for card nights and such. But we haven't been able to do that. But now we all have an excuse to go on Zoom, and So we bought a couple games, and I've been seeing some friends from undergrad, hung out with Chris and Whitney once, and played some games and got to see each other. And it's been nice to find a reason to kind of carve aside some time and spend some social time with people, even though you can't see them face to face. That's as close to a hobby as I've done.
How about music? Is there anything you'd like to recommend to people to or turn them on to, or something that you've kind of discovered recently that you think, oh, I had forgotten that this was such a great piece. I watched Itzhak Perlman last night. He was broadcast with the New York Philharmonic, and he admitted to the audience that he despised the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto just because he had started learning it at age 11, and it became something that he didn't have any connection to or didn't, frankly, even like. So he just put it away for a long time and then brought it back and realized what an amazing piece of music it actually is. And he didn't associate it anymore with, the drudgery of working it up for a performance as a brilliant teenager. But any music like that that's come across, it doesn't necessarily have to be classical.
Well, most of the listening I do, I would say, is jazz based, and that's just been my preference of listening. I usually find I'm listening to classical music as a way to study for preparing for something. So my extracurricular listening is usually jazz. But maybe lately, my husband plays trombone also, if that hasn't come up yet. But so we've been playing a lot of duets together, and trying to find new duet books, new things to play. And the ones that I've really been enjoying are all Telemann. They're all transcriptions of Telemann duos and stuff. And so every time we come across one of those, I've been enjoying them more and more lately. So I think that's a newer discovery for me.
It's kind of a purity about music from that era too. Mm-hmm. And there's just a real loveliness about the way one line interlaps with the other. And I just, for me, that's kind of a good zone out music, or a music to kind of rearrange your synapses. But I like the fact that you listen to something completely non-classical just to kind of unplug. I'm kind of the same way. If I listen to classical music and I'm driving, I would not want to be anybody driving around me because I'm just not paying attention. I'm thinking, oh, why did they do that? Or, oh, what a great choice. How come I'd never thought of that before? I always become like an instant critic sitting there, like the guys on the Muppets sitting up in the box, commenting on everything that's going on. So it's definitely not a good idea for me to necessarily listen to classical music while I'm driving. But I like to find something else, or podcasts are kind of the big thing for me right now. Just hearing really smart people talk about things that they're really smart about is gratifying and fun. And it may not be a subject I really necessarily had an interest in before, but just to hear them talk about it with such authority and with such an opinion, I really enjoy that.
Yeah, and shout out to Whitney for submitting that video for the Erie Philharmonic of her playing one of those Telemann duets. It was really cool.
Thank you.
My listening has been, for me too, Maestro. When I'm listening to classical, it is a part of my brain that it is my hobby, but also my passion, but also my job, and it's fully engaging. So it's nothing that can exist in the background. It's total capture for me. So, but I have been studying some other music. I wrote a quick blog post on the Erie Philharmonic From Home series about American orchestral music from between the world wars. And so that's a lot of the time period that I really love. A lot of the Barber symphonies, especially his lesser-known Symphony No. 2 that I really love. A lot of Walter Piston I'm a big fan of. So just listening to some of that orchestra music. As far as non-orchestral music, I have a deep love of Hindemith. And I really never tire of listening to his compositions. And my third dissertation recital that got canceled was actually all Hindemith. It was a lecture recital of Hindemith solo sonatas, starting with his very first wind sonata, his bassoon sonata, and then working through his trumpet sonata, his alto horn sonata, and his tuba sonata to put them in context with each other. But Hindemith's music can sound kind of spiky to a lot of people. There's a lot of dotted rhythms, and and a lot of jumps. But once you kind of buy into the tonal language of Hindemith, I think it becomes really approachable and really, really amazing. I don't know if someone listening to this hasn't started their day with the Ludus Tonalis in a while. It sounds like sunrise when the piece starts. And the Symphonic Metamorphoses was one of my first pieces that really made me love orchestra, and so I've just really been enjoying Hindemith lately.
I love his music too, and I like the fact that it's cerebral as much as it's inspired. I mean, there's a real craft, almost like a Bach-like craft, I think, that goes into the way that he writes music that I think is underappreciated. And I also think the tonality is why I think a lot of people don't think of him first and foremost when they think about 20th century music. You know, much more attention goes to Stravinsky or goes to Schoenberg, and I think Hindemith deserves a lot more credit for that just that intellectual capability that he has when he writes music. It's really fantastic. Well, Whitney and Ken, I've just had an absolute pleasure talking to you both, and we could do this for a couple more hours. But,
Absolutely.
just a great opportunity for us to connect with our audience. I want to take this opportunity to say thank you to you both. I love working with you, and I miss working with you, and I hope that we get back on the stage very, very soon. And I would just want to say to our audience, thank you for your passion for the Erie Philharmonic and your love of our music. Is there anything you want to say before we sign off, Whitney or Ken?
Just echoing that, we really appreciate having an audience now virtually and an audience to come back to, and we can't wait till that happens in whatever form at whatever time. We're excited to be back when we can.
Yeah, music is about people, and working with the both of you is an absolute privilege, and to be back on stage with the two of you is something I absolutely cannot wait to do. And so and music doesn't happen if we're just all playing for each other. It only happens if there's an audience. It's a critical part of what makes music an actual experience thing, and it changes how it feels on the stage too. And so I just can't wait to reconnect with all of the audience members, many of whom I've met and have come up and talked to me after concerts, and several who just listen and appreciate it. And you know, we know you're there, we feel that, we appreciate it, and we can't wait to come back.
You're here. Well said. Hey guys, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure.
Thank you.
Bye.